Hey guys, here we are in an early JK with an L83 5.3 LT engine. I think this engine is going to become important in the future JK and JL engine swaps because of what it has to offer. First thing it has to offer is low cost. GM is cranking these engines out by the millions, and that doesn't mean it's not an advanced engine. It is. It's just being built in high numbers, which gives us good economies of scale. Let's look at some of the specs on this engine and why I think it's going to make such a good candidate in the JK. 355 horsepower is very respectable. That's about 20 to 30 horsepower more than the Gen 4 engine. But that's not really what we're looking at. Look at the 382 foot-pounds of torque. That's a lot of torque, and what that means is we can now move a heavy JK with a 5.3 engine without it downshifting like the Gen 4 engines did or the V6 engines do. How does the Gen 5 5.3 get so much torque? Well, we're going to look at that in a second, but basically we have direct injection, we have high compression, we got continuous variable valve timing and other technologies that allow this smaller displacement engine to act like a larger displacement engine. In my opinion, this engine runs similar, if not harder, than the Gen 4 6.0 engine, and I'd say right up there with the 5.7 VVT Hemis. You'll also notice here that the 5.3 runs on E85, which means it's flex fuel, and it can run on regular gas, and we'll get into that in a minute. This is also an 8-cylinder motor. What that means is we have 2 more firing pulses per revolution to not only create power, but also to compression brake. So this engine has a lot to offer. It's low cost, regular gas, high compression, high performance, and I think it's going to make one of the best choices for your JK or your JL, as I mentioned earlier. Let's look at the GM spec sheet in this 5.3 engine. As you can see, it's about 5.3 liters, which is smaller than the old 5.7 liter K motors, which were the standard motors in the trucks, and were putting out over 300 horsepower, where they were putting out less than 200 horsepower. It shows you how far we've come along in the last few years. So we got an overhead valve motor. As you know, the trend is to go to overhead cams in the smaller engines like the Pentstars, and they do perform better, but there's a lot more complexity and a lot more parts involved. GM has somehow made their V8 engines, overhead valves, competitive with the rest of the world, which is a very old architecture, but it's one that is reliable and works well, just as is the 2 valves per cylinder. Sure, you can go to 4 valves or 5 valves per cylinder. The combustion chamber technology in these new direct injected engines is really second to none for an overhead valve engine. GM spent millions of CAD hours designing these combustion chambers. This is a full roller motor, which basically means, yes, we have plain bearings. We don't have roller main bearings, but we have roller rocker arms and we have a roller camshaft, and that does help reduce friction, and it also allows a better cam profile. We do have sequential fuel injection, which basically means that each cylinder is controlled separately or independently from the other cylinders. You can even shut fuel off. We also have DI, as you can see, which is direct injection. Direct injection puts the fuel directly into the combustion chamber. By doing this, combustion efficiency has been improved. We can run higher compression ratios with less pre-ignition. So direct injection has really taken the LT engines to a new level. What's really amazing here is, look at that compression ratio, 11 to 1, and we're running on regular gasoline, or E85. These engines put a lot of bottom end torque out, so even though our RPM limit is 5,800 RPM, most of your power is going to be produced at the lower revs. And that's great for a heavy JK because we've got to get the weight of these vehicles moving. And that's great in a heavy JK because we got to really get the mass of this vehicle off the line. And that's what the direct injection and the high compression and the CVVT do. Moving on down, of course, we've got catalytic converters, 3-way, so we're doing NOx, CO, and HC. We also have a PCV system, which pretty much every engine produced since the 1960s have. As mentioned, the 355 horsepower is a little bit deceiving because if you look at that number below it, 382 foot-pounds of torque, that's a lot of torque for a 5.3 liter engine. And it's that torque that moves you, not so much the horsepower. All the Gen 5 motors that we've worked with are cast aluminum. They have a cross-bolted main, which makes it strong. Intake manifolds, plastic, of course. These 5.3 engines are basically running GM's powdered forged components, which they put in their standard engines for a lot of years now. We're not running billet forged components like the LS9s or LS7s or some of the other high performance engines, but if you look at the cost of these engines, what you get, it's pretty amazing. So what the L83 is really coming down to is a mass-produced engine that's high technology. We're getting technologies in these engines that were exotic European technologies from just a decade ago, whether it's the direct injection. One thing I mentioned in my last video, which is very important, is the continuous variable valve timing. CVVT allows us to control the cylinder pressure, which also controls the torque output of the engine. And these Gen 5 LT engines are all about torque. When you go with an 8-speed transmission, and we'll talk about the 6-speed in a second, they're torque management based, which basically means that transmission is shifting based on the torque output of the engine. This makes it a lot more difficult to tune, but it also means that we can be a little bit more efficient. 8-speed, slightly more efficient than the 6-speed. Is it a lot? No. It's a single digit. And is it worth upgrading from a 6-speed to an 8-speed? Well, I think if you have a heavy JK on 40s and with a lot of mass, the slightly lower first gear might have an advantage. But honestly, I'm still a big fan of the 6-speed. The 6L80 is an adaptive clutch-to-clutch low-friction transmission, and it's still very valid today. The 6.2 L86 and the 5.3 L83 are both available with either a 6-speed or an 8-speed. The LT1 is available with the 8-speed 8L90 only. I do not believe they put the 6-speed behind that. But as usual, GM has made interchangeability very easy on the LTs. Pretty much everything bolts up to everything else. And if you look at GM performance, you can even put 4 speeds behind these LTs now with standalone controllers. So there's a lot of versatility. However, we do tend to stick with production OE calibrations and tunes to stay legal, and we'll talk about that in another video. But just know that I feel the L83 is going to become the engine swap choice of the future for our JKs and our JLs. It's a very efficient and powerful engine. It's enough even for a heavy JK, which really the Gen 4 was not. The Gen 4 5.3 pretty much, the Gen 4 5.3 made a great engine in a lighter JK, but not one on 1 tons and 40s and armor, winches, bumpers, and all that. The Gen 5 5.3 I feel does. We've got a few Gen 5 5.3s in the works right now in heavy JKs, and we're going to be reporting back on those in some future videos. So stay tuned, and we'll see you in the next video.